I first saw him on the first day of the new semester, sitting at the back of the classroom, his blue eyes burning with a mix of curiosity and defiance. He was different from the other students, older in some ways, younger in others. I couldn't quite place my finger on it, but there was an intensity about him that drew me in. My name is Claire Hamilton, and I'm a professor of English literature. I've been teaching at the small college in upstate New York for the past 10 years. The mundanity of academic life had been a steady, reliable companion, but as I approached my 40s, the predictability started to feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. My husband Robert was a kind man, but our marriage had become a series of polite routines. We had grown distant, more like roommates than lovers. And then there was Ben. Ben Thorne was just 19, a sophomore with an undisciplined charm. He was brilliant in an unpolished way, his essays teeming with raw talent, but lacking the refinement that comes with experience. He challenged me in class, often questioning my interpretations and offering his own provocative views. There was a spark in him that I hadn't seen in a student for years. He made me feel alive, and I couldn't ignore the thrill that ran through me whenever he spoke. One afternoon, after a particularly heated discussion on The Great Gatsby, Ben lingered after class. The room emptied out, leaving the two of us alone. He walked up to my desk, his gaze unwavering. "Professor Hamilton, I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an underlying urgency. "Of course, Ben. What's on your mind?" I replied, trying to keep my tone professional though my heart was racing. "I feel like there's more to the literature than what we discuss in class. I want to understand it on a deeper level. Can you help me?" There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that caught me off guard. I nodded, feeling the pull of something dangerous yet irresistible. "Why don't we meet during office hours?" I suggested. I was hoping for something more personal. Maybe we could discuss it over coffee. I should have said no. I should have set boundaries, but instead, I agreed. "All right, Ben. How about tomorrow evening at the cafe on 5th? He smiled, and for a moment I forgot all the reasons why this was a bad idea. The next evening we met at the cafe. It was a quaint place, dimly lit with the rich aroma of coffee beans hanging in the air. We found a corner table, and as we talked, I felt an electric connection between us. We discussed literature, but our conversation soon drifted to more personal topics. He told me about his troubled childhood, his estranged father, and his dreams of becoming a writer. I shared parts of my life that I hadn't spoken of in years. There was an intimacy in our exchange that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. As the weeks passed, our meetings became more frequent. We ventured beyond the cafe, finding secluded spots where we could talk without the fear of being seen. It wasn't long before our conversations turned into something more. The first time he kissed me, we were in my office. It was a late evening, the campus deserted. He leaned in, and I didn't pull away. His lips were soft and eager, and the kiss ignited a fire within me that I hadn't felt in years. Our affair began that night. We were careful, always meeting in secret, always aware of the consequences, but the secrecy only heightened the passion. There was a raw, unbridled intensity to our relationship that consumed us both. We would spend hours wrapped in each other's arms, finding solace in our stolen moments. I knew it couldn't last. The risk was too great, but I was addicted to the way he made me feel young, desired, alive. He was my escape from the monotony of my life, my rebellion against the constraints that had been imposed on me. The first crack in our facade appeared when one of my colleagues, Professor Emma Manders, noticed our closeness. Emma was sharp and observant, and she confronted me one afternoon. "Claire, I've seen the way you look at Ben," she said, her tone filled with concern. "You need to be careful. If anyone finds out, it could ruin your career." Fear flooded through me. I quickly got dressed and opened the door a crack. A woman stood there holding a clipboard. "Is everything all right?" she asked, peering past me into the room. "Yes, everything's fine," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "We don't need anything." She nodded and left, but the interruption shattered the illusion of safety we had built around ourselves. I turned to Ben, my heart pounding. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's too risky." "Claire, I love you," he replied, his eyes pleading. "I don't care about the risk. I want to be with you." His words tore at my heart. I wanted to believe that we could make it work, that love would be enough. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. We need to be careful, I insisted. If anyone finds out, it will ruin us both. He nodded, but the fear in his eyes told me he understood the gravity of our situation. We continued our affair, but the tension grew. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, the fear of discovery hanging over us like a dark cloud. It was only a matter of time before our luck ran out. The end came in the form of an anonymous email. It arrived in my inbox one morning, a single line of text that made my blood run cold. "I know about you," and Ben panic set in. I had no idea who had sent it or how much they knew. I tried to carry on as usual, but the threat of exposure loomed large. One afternoon, Ben came to my office, his face pale and drawn. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. I closed the door, my heart racing. "What is it?" "I got an email too. Someone knows about us." Fear gripped me. What are we going to do? We need to come clean. If we confess, maybe we can control the damage. The thought of confessing filled me with dread, but I knew he was right. We couldn't continue living in fear. We had to face the consequences of our actions. We decided to go to the dean together. The meeting was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. We explained our relationship, knowing that it would mean the end of my career and possibly legal repercussions. The dean listened, his expression grave. When we finished, he sat back in his chair, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Claire, I expected better from you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "This is a serious breach of ethics. There will be an investigation, and you will likely lose your position here." I nodded, unable to speak. The weight of my actions crashed down on me, and I felt a crushing sense of guilt and shame. And Ben the dean continued, turning to him, "This will go on your record. It could affect your future." Ben nodded, his eyes downcast. The reality of our situation was hitting us both hard. The investigation was swift and thorough. I was placed on administrative leave, and Ben was given a suspension. The scandal rocked the campus, and whispers followed us wherever we went. The anonymity that had protected us was gone, replaced by a glaring spotlight that exposed our every move. Robert found out, of course. He was devastated, unable to comprehend how I could betray him. Our marriage, already fragile, crumbled completely. He filed for divorce, and I was left alone, my career in ruins, my personal life shattered. As for Ben, he struggled to pick up the pieces of his life. The suspension affected his scholarship, and he had to leave the college. We tried to stay in touch, but the bond that had once seemed so unbreakable was now fraught with pain and regret. The last time I saw him was a year after the scandal broke. We met at a park, a neutral ground where we could talk without fear of being recognized. He looked older, the weight of our actions etched into his face. "How are you?" I asked, unsure of what else to say. "I'm trying to move on," he replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "It's not easy, but I'm getting there." "I'm sorry, Ben, for everything." He shook his head. "We both made mistakes, Claire. We knew the risks and we paid the price." We sat in silence for a while, the enormity of what we had lost hanging between us. Finally, he stood up. "I have to go," he said. "Take care of yourself." "You too," I replied, my voice breaking. He walked away, and I watched him go, knowing that this was the end of our story. The pain of our separation was a constant ache, a reminder of the choices we had made and the lives we had destroyed. Our affair was a lesson in the devastating power of passion. It burned brightly, consuming everything in its path, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. And as I sat alone in that park, I realized that some fires are too dangerous to play with, no matter how tempting the flame. The years that followed were a blur of attempts to rebuild my life. I moved to a different town, far away from the memories of my past. I found a job teaching at a community college, a far cry from the prestigious institution I had once been a part of. My reputation followed me, and there were always whispers, but I tried to focus on the future. Robert remarried, finding happiness with someone who could give him the stability and fidelity I had failed to provide. I didn't begrudge him his new life, he deserved it. I, on the other hand, struggled to find a sense of peace. The guilt and shame never fully left me, haunting me in quiet moments. As for Ben, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually returned to college and graduated. He moved to the West Coast, pursuing his dream of becoming a writer. His talent was undeniable, and I hoped that he would find success and happiness, free from the shadow of our past. One evening, a few years after everything had fallen apart, I received a letter. It was from Ben. My hands trembled as I opened it, the familiar handwriting bringing back a flood of memories. Dear Claire, I hope this letter finds you well. I thought about writing to you many times, but I never knew what to say. There are still so many emotions tied up in our past: regret, sadness, but also a kind of bittersweet nostalgia. I wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. I published a few short stories, and I'm working on a novel. It's been a long journey, but I feel like I'm finally finding my way. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive yourself for what happened between us, but I want you to know that I don't blame you. We both made choices, and we both have to live with the consequences. But I also want you to know that despite everything, I don't regret loving you. You taught me so much about passion, about life, about myself. I hope you found some peace and that you're happy. You deserve that much. Take care. Ben. I read the letter over and over, tears streaming down my face. It was a small comfort knowing that he had found some measure of happiness and that he didn't hold our past against me. It didn't erase the pain, but it helped to soften the edges of my guilt. As I sat by the window watching the sunset on another day, I felt a glimmer of hope. The past would always be a part of me, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move forward, to forgive myself, to live again.